Hey, Tolerators, it's me, Natalie, with your before show updates on all things Team Tolerator. So, we are sitting on the January, February, March side of life. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like the misogyny meltdown over on Patreon is well underway. That is a new series and show that I am producing for Patreon members only because there is a lot of scripting and a lot of vulnerability going on. I've already sang a song, I've already produced a skit, I'm already writing comedy. So take a chance on the misogyny meltdown and the way that To All the Men I've Tolerated Before is expanding and evolving with the link in the show notes. For January, we celebrated the Misogynist of the Year award ceremony. For February, we are focusing on the concept of love and self-love being part of the resistance. And in March, why, yes, we're still going to do seasonal things with celebrating International Women's Month. And all of that will be wrapped up into our new variety show, Misogyny Meltdown. I cannot wait for you to check it out. Hey, Tolerators, this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Amply Katona, your weekly look at everyday misogyny. It's a good day here on the team because we have one of our favorite reoccurring guests on. It's Julia Washington, the host of Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous, and she's going to be here as a nice little partner episode to the Elizabeth Kyle episode where we talked about raising daughters, to talk about what it's like to raise a son in a misogynistic scenario. Not scenario, society. Julia didn't actually make misogyny. Julia didn't create misogyny for herself and her son. That's not what happened.
It's my fault.
It's always the mother's fault.
I'm here to tell you it's my fault. I did, in fact, create misogyny.
With this, fuzzy scarf, too. You're like, hello, I've gathered you all here today.
My fuzzy pink scarf. My neck scarf. It's like, dearly beloved, I've gathered here today to admit it is all my fault.
It is all my fault. Now, we have heard information, vague information about your parenting situation.
Mm-hmm.
What is the TLDR of your parenting situation?
I'm a single mom.
Okay.
Of a male child.
Who is a
boy,
yes. Male child, but also a college student.
A college student, yes. He is a college student now. I mean, we've known each other for so long. He was not a college student when we became friends. That's why I was like, I don't know where she's going.
He's a grown person.
He's going to be able to vote in this year's presidential election, 2024.
I forgot that he started college not being able to do that.
Yeah.
Let's take us back to a very young, pregnant Julia.
Well, I was very young.
Mm-hmm. Did you wait to find out the sex of the baby that you were having?
So here's a funny story. I was a high-risk pregnancy at 20 years old because guess what? That can happen at any age.
At any age?
At any age. And so I had to go in for regular sonograms because they had to make sure I wasn't dilating, which TMI for the people at home.
No one knows what the word dilate means.
Except for those who have had children. Okay. And so the first time we had a sonogram, they're like, do you want to know? And I was like, sure, I don't care. And they're like, oh, girl. And I was like, cool. Fuck. Like, not fuck because I didn't want a girl, but fuck, I'm going to have to deal with a girl having daddy issues because of who impregnated me and, like, he not being able to cope being a girl dad. Like, that was literally what I thought. It's like, I would have it so much easier if this is a boy because then they could, like, have whatever dad son shit rather than girl dad shit. Because I've been through girl dad shit as the girl who is a daddy's girl. And then 4 weeks later, we went back again, or I went back again. He wasn't with me the first time. I don't think. Girl, that show was 20 years ago. And then they're like, oh, look, we found a penis. And I was like, cool. Like, So when people tell me the gender of their baby, I have to remind myself, like, technology is so much better now that they would maybe know at 12 weeks, because at 20 weeks, they told me I was having a girl. And then at 24 weeks, they're like, look, there's a penis. It's like, cool.
Surprise, a penis.
Surprise, a penis.
I know.
Which he was thrilled by, which, you know, so of course you are, because men are, whatever.
Narcissistic.
And tell me, when that baby came out looking like my family and me and grew up looking like me, I was like, ha ha ha, I win.
When it became very clear to you that you would be raising a son, did any of that initial, like, I called it fear, but it's also a responsibility of like, oh, I'm going to have to raise a son who is not a misogynist? Or did that come later?
I think it came later because, you know what, in 2004, we weren't talking like that. We weren't discussing, like, it was very much, you know, you can raise a girl to be anything, girls can be anything. And we're that generation, right? Like, you can girls be anything. And we weren't really discussing, like, the importance of raising a well-balanced male child. And I think for me, because of the kind of family I grew up in, and I know I've said a lot of negative things about my family, this episode will be full of positive things, in fact. Ooh. There wasn't ever really, how do I put it? My dad was a very good girl dad. Mm-hmm. Like, he wasn't the type of person who was like, girls can only be docile and you must, I mean, he told us that we were too loud all the time, but that's just him. It had nothing to do with his belief about women needing to be quiet, or with a belief. He doesn't believe necessarily that. And like, so because my mother was a mental health professional, which is not what we called it 40 years ago, by the way, there was very much always an emphasis on, like, we're discussing our emotions, we're discussing inequities, we're discussing inequalities. Like, my entire life was full of conversations about, like, around the dinner table of, like, you know, isn't this bullshit that they're treating this woman this way? Or isn't it bullshit that, like, your mom was passed over for promotion because of X, Y, and Z? So, like, in my mind, I wasn't worried about him coming out and growing into being a person who was going to see the world in that sort of deficit type of way. And I think a lot of that also was because I knew I was going to be a single mom. Like, you disappear on a girl when she's pregnant, I'm building the world for me to exist as a single mom. Like, I'm not worried. I mean, it's not that I wasn't worried, but, like, I mean, that man disappeared for 3 months of my pregnancy. So I kind of was like, oh, I'm in charge. I don't have to, we're doing this my way. Does that even answer your question? I don't even know.
Well, it does, because, you know, my nephew's about to be 1. And I remember when I got the text message that there would be a new man in my life. And I said, but I didn't want any more. And yeah. I guess that wasn't really up to me at the end of the day.
I mean, you really can't control what anatomy
and maybe it's because it is 2024, but we talk to him like we talk to his father, which means that we're constantly being like, women can do anything. And we like women best, it turns out. And, like, you know, just already building the, oh, look how smart mom is. Look how smart you are.
When he started school, he did come home and say something. He was, like, so awful to my mom one day. And I kind of pulled him. I was like, we don't talk to your grandma that way. She is your elder. She is somebody who has always loved you and has never treated you in a way that deserves that kind of attitude. And then he never did it again. So even though that outside element, whatever it was, some sort of element at school got seeped into him, I nipped it, because it's like, that's how we were raised too. Like, your grandparents have never treated you in a way to deserve that kind of tone. What are you doing? You know, kind of stuff. And same with our parents. Like, I mean, my life changed at 12 years old, but that's a whole separate conversation. But prior to everything from 12 years and earlier, it was very much like, no one in your life has treated you in a way for them to deserve you talking to them like that kind of vibe. So I would nip that stuff in the bud as soon as I could. And same with, like, just as we're always having those conversations around the dinner table, challenging the status quo, never shying away from conversations about, like, I'm frustrated and this happened and I'm pretty confident it's because I'm a woman. sharing the nuances, that sort of thing. And I think on the other side of that coin, it was also like, hey, just because I'm struggling, like, here are ways for you to not, like, here's how you can also help when you're a grown up, not contribute to the system and the situation. It's really interesting, Natalie, too, because I recently got into a conversation with a family member who's a year older than me, also raised by a single mom. And she's a wonderful woman, but I'm noticing she raised a misogynist who challenges people when it comes to their lived experience. And this person's also biracial. So it really bothers me because I had made a comment about having done a booth and how like two really creepy guys came to my table and it made me very uncomfortable. He's like, creepy how? I don't have to explain that to my son. He understands the creepy how because I've walked him through, right? Like the nuance of it. Like when, as women, we know when we say there's a creepy guy over there, we get it. Like we don't have to explain it. And with my son, I've never had to like verbally explain it because he's witnessed it enough to understand it as if it were him experiencing it. And it was just so interesting to me how the main difference, like in the ways that we approach motherhood for, 1980s, single motherhood, 1980s, both of us with non-present fathers in the situation versus, the early 2000s. And then the mom did step in and be like, so-and-so, it's hard to explain when you haven't lived through it. Women just understand it. And it's just like,
but we're all still living on the same planet. So if you're experiencing it at Target and he is also at Target, then there's a line of communication that needs to be open to be like, did we see how that weirdo got too close to me? This is what it felt like in my body. This is what it felt like to experience that.
It was the combativeness of my relative that made me shut down and be like, I don't want to talk to you about this because you're challenging my existence and how I feel.
Well, and I have edited a couple of episodes recently where that's come up more than once, where it's like, I'm part of my constant mental and emotional exhaustion is convincing other people that my fear is relevant and my fear is justified and getting validation back from people when I say, I will not be spending time with this person. It does not serve me.
And the worst part is there's this veil of like, I'm pretending to be curious. You're not curious. Like your question doesn't come from a place of curiosity. Your question comes from a place of, I don't believe you. And again, it's a nuance that we understand because we constantly fucking live with that. And that was the thing that I was like, how do I make sure the nonverbal stuff that is nuanced my kid gets?
Right. And I think unfortunately, because of the way that we were talking about misogyny and girl boss energy and all of that in the early 2000s, and then we were raised in the 80s and the 90s, it's the rules that men were given were very good rules as young men, but they also don't really serve me anymore, where it's like, we don't hit girls, we don't raise our voices to girls, we don't cuss out girls. So we've kind of not seen a dip in that because that still very much happens. But now we have this type of young man who believes that telling you that your experience didn't actually happen is fine because he didn't go, well, why do you fucking hate men anyways? And you're going to tell us that we're creepy. He asked in what you would technically describe as a polite manner, but there's this entitlement to ask. It's very Dax Shepard.
Yes. And the other part of that too, Natalie, is nobody prepared the men in our generation for the fact that we would be high achievers in various industries that they would also be in. While we're being told we can do anything, we can be the doctor, we can be the lawyer, we can do all the things that our mother's generation wasn't allowed to do or tried to do and hit serious roadblocks, nobody prepared the boys for the room to also be filled with girls. And that's the other part of it that I think is really hard watching adult millennials and the way that they behave, because it's almost like we're the same generation. How is it that I got the message that it's okay for me to be in this room, but you're indignant about it?
Yes. Sam and I are going to a women's only Valentine's Day dance this weekend. And every time the event gets reposted or recirculated or whatever, I check on it. Like, who am I going to have to see this weekend? Who am I dealing with? What's going on? Because I've been told that safe places have been safe places before, and I just don't want to be tricked.
Right.
And of course, the only comments on this event are men being like, why can't I come? And then someone from the organization having to be like, we planned this event with this in mind, and it's fine that you cannot come. Like, it's fine that you cannot come. And then there's always someone who's like, well, are you going to do this for us too? And it's like, well, number one, none of you would be interested. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like, we don't have anything planned yet, but if someone would like to volunteer, because it's an organization that has like open planning meetings, like, we're willing to talk about volunteer hours, about resources, about things like that. And I'm screenshotting it to my friend who's going, and I was like, that these men aren't men who even want to go.
They're just being combative to be combative.
They're just combative because heaven forbid anyone that is a marginalized voice get something that you're not getting.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back, we just had our episode. Well, you haven't listened to it. I've edited it. We live in the future, so it has come out by now. About incels with JD. And he goes, he just kept bringing it back to entitlement. It's like, it's not that these men are prone to violence right off the bat, or they're really all that undesirable, or they weren't like really not awkward guys or whatever. It's the entitlement to the female attention that they're not, and because they're not receiving it, now they're violent, now they're resentful. And I think it is because you're right, they weren't prepared. And I think a lot of sons somehow, even if they're not raised with the internal belief that they will have the lay of the land and everything will be handed to them and it will be their world to conquer, at some point it gets brought up.
Yeah, you can't control, like the story about the way he came home and treated my mom. You can't control what the outside world is going to do and infiltrate on your children. You can have open conversations and sort of dissect that stuff. I had a friend all my friends had kids 10 years after I did, pretty much. But you really should have kids when you're, not a college dropout and, have money and a job.
Maybe.
Those things are helpful. And she texted me and she's like, I can't believe you did this by yourself. This is so hard. And part of me was like, I mean, yeah, to an extent, my parents were really helpful in making things livable. But at the end of the day, I don't think I would do it all over again. I mean, this is going to sound like shade to his dad, but it's not intended to be. I don't think my son would have turned out the way he turned out had his father been an involved dad. Because what I observe in behavior are things that I don't want in a partner or my children. Avoiding responsibility, making excuses, avoiding emotions, non-communicative. Like, these were all the things that I was experiencing in the adult version, and I didn't want that in my kid. When you are a single parent who can do it truly alone, this is why women choose to do it alone by choice, you don't have to deal with someone else's weird shit getting into your kid. Do I worry about my son's relationship with his father and whether or not it's healthy? All the time. But that's also on his dad. That's his responsibility, not mine. I've created a space where he can come to me and talk about stuff when he's frustrated. Like, we understand how dad is. And so if anyone's going to understand the disappointment of, broken promises or any of this stuff, it's me. And I'm not going to do it in a way where it's like, yeah, your dad's a real piece of shit. It's going to be like, I'm really sorry that your dad disappointed you this week. Or I'm really glad your dad's stepping up. Like, this is amazing. I'm really happy to see that this relationship is turning into what it's turning into. But he didn't have anything, zero hands involved in forming and shaping this child. So, like, that was solely left up to me. And I'm a big believer in, you have emotions, let's feel them. Let's talk about it. I didn't do the perfunctory questions of like, how was your day? it was, tell me something about today that was interesting. Tell me what you learned in math class. Like, it was very directed in that way, which then kind of created this environment where he felt safe and could talk about stuff. I'm not saying it's perfect. We definitely have, issues, but something that really stood out to me before he turned teenager and went into middle school, we had a lot of people saying like, oh, he's going to be in middle school. Pretty soon he's going to, and then insert some terrible thing boys do here, like the grossness of boys and just, the bad attitudes and all this shit. And finally, after like a handful of interactions with people saying that stuff, we get in the car and he goes, Mom, I really hate that people are saying that because they don't know if that's going to be me. I don't know if that's going to be me. I don't want that. I don't want to be like that. And I was like, honey, I appreciate that that's how you feel. And I'm here to help you grow in the way that you want to grow. And like, I'm really sorry that that's what society thinks that you should be or will be. Like, the attitude was, this is inevitable. This will happen to your male child. I had people tell me, are you going to go for a girl? Because, you know your son's not going to be willing to take care of you when you're older. And it was like, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah, let me go try for a girl now. Like, no, that's not how I'm raising my son. We have familial relationship and responsibility to each other. You know what I mean? It was just like, what is wrong with your mentality? Because we aren't doing the things that we should be doing to have boys invested in family as men, as they grow into men. That's why men raised by single moms are a fucking golden ticket, honestly, because all the ones that I've met have been quality people.
Well, except for that family member who got combative.
Well, yeah, except for in that situation, totally. Yeah. Thank you for remembering that.
Well, and I also think, because I was trying to formulate this question, and it was a chicken before the egg before the chicken question, where is it easier to raise women to defend themselves against the system, or is it easier for sons who technically thrive in the system to learn how to not play into that system? Like, which is a harder guide?
Yeah, gosh.
And I think what it is it's the same guide, it's just different. Because what I see a lot of times when little kids come home from school is that little boys come home with little boy behaviors and mouthy behaviors, and little girls come home with new anxieties and new insecurities.
Yeah.
And you'll have like a perfectly brave, bold little girl, and then all of a sudden she's just saying ridiculous, like, I hate my hair, I hate the way that I look. And a lot of that is the new lay of the land when it comes to raising children and the amount of exposure they have to the world and pretty people. And then to even layer upon agendered or non-binary children who are like, well, I don't want to be acting like him, but I'm also not very comfortable with her experience either.
Or just even the self-expression of like experimenting with clothing and wearing things just to wear them because you like them. And then it's like, boys don't wear that, girls don't wear that. That kind of shit too plays into it as well. And I think what I've observed in my experience is that there is very much this mentality, especially when you live in a community like mine that is still ag heavy, very red in a lot of ways. That structure of the 50s that was introduced post World War II is still very prevalent, where it's like, I'm parent, your child, do as I say, live up to expectation. What more do you want from me kind of attitude? And so then it perpetuates this inability for people to be able to express emotions, to attach, to bond, to build relationship and meet expectations of each other, because no one's talking about what those expectations are. We've always had conversations about expectations. I mean, you witnessed it and you even kind of busted me on it a little bit too back in December when we were together. But the way that like we have conversation about anything, it's like, I've never shied away from having chats with my kid about things. They've just always been age appropriate. There have been situations where it's like, I'm not ready to have that conversation, but it is in the notebook to address at some point. And I think that's part of what's scary for parents, because we are overwhelmed, we are tired, it is a lot of work, and why are you bothering me? Like, didn't you just spend all day at school? I can't deal with you right now. Breeds also another sort of layer of parenting that I just couldn't get behind. My approach was always, yeah, I'm fucking tired. Give me 20 minutes. Like, let me have 20 minutes and then let me decompress, and then we can come and do all the things. I will meet your needs. I'm trying to remember. We always did.
It's like you're doing the process backwards and you're working backwards. And I couldn't imagine because, when they're tiny, they're just in your house and you get to fill their brains with whatever you want to fill their brains with. And then they go to school. So it's this whole idea of you teaching a young man in this house. There is equity and there is equality. Women matter in this house. People of color matter in this house. The queer community is loved and celebrated in this house. And especially when it comes to people who are raising white men, they go to school and you can't tell me that kids don't already see the very subtle hidden ways that these structures are already ingrained in our kids' lives in school and outside of school. So here you are trying to be like, you have to be very comfortable with women and non-binary students being on the football team. They have every right to be there as you do. And you're trying to get ahead of that conversation. Meanwhile, you have no idea whether or not a non-binary student or a female student will ever want to be on the football team. So there's also just like a lack of real world practice because once they leave your house, it's the lay of the land.
And we have the added layer of my son can also play the you don't know that I have ethnicity card. And that part, and I think because of that, he learned very early on the structure is imbalanced because he does have experiences because my dad was his primary childcare when I was working, because we did put him in like preschool and stuff, but preschool is not full time here. Like, I mean, Head Start was, but, the hoops you jump through, whatever, that's a whole other conversation. So here's this little boy who looks like he could be white running around with this big black man and people being like, the fuck? Which is also the experience I had, right? Like this cute little blonde girl running around with this black man and people being like, that's not right. So he got, a front row seat to microaggressions and layers of racism that aren't blatant, like dropping the N-word kind of shit. And it's interesting because I wonder if we didn't have relationship with my family, because that really did help in aiding of the conversations and opening the door of those of like, here's how we don't want to be. Even when he was going off to college, I made a comment. I was like, you can identify however you want to identify. I identify as a biracial person. That's my experience. I grew up with both sides of the family. You've primarily grown up with us, the mixed side, and then your Irish grandparents. Fucking white. Like, these people are hell fucking white. We love them, but it's like, some days I leave their house, I'm like, fuck, I need to do I need to go to black church now? Because I feel like I have too much white around me. And not in a bad way. It's just like, it's not the culture I was raised in. So it is one of those things where I'm just like, I need a break. I wonder if he would have had some sort of like inadvertent entitlement ingrained in him if the only side of the family he had exposure to was his Irish/white side.
Yeah. Well, and I think something that's also different from the way that we were raised compared to now is that raising a good son literally ended at, is your kid violent? So it was a lot of no means no, but but these are all of the points that happened before the yes or the no happened. It was, we don't hit girls, we don't scream and all of it. And now we have all of this other stuff that you and I are aware of as millennial women that we're like, okay, yeah, I don't want to be hit, but I also don't want to be trapped in a situation where I rely on him for money. And how do we make my son okay with that?
Yeah. And we've had those conversations too, because he's seen it. He's seen it because of my financial struggles and just having, me saying things like, I really, like, yeah, I joke about how it'd be great if I could just marry a wealthy man at this point, but also, like, I don't ever want to not have my own money. And he feels that kind of too as well, because he is being supported by my parents through university right now. At the same time, you know, I think I will say I became a much better parent as I started learning myself. So at 20, I'm like, oh, this is how parenting is, like how my parents were, right? And then as we lived through experiences and I realized I have to work 3 times as hard to just have a stupid fucking $16 an hour job to get anywhere to support us, you know, then it's, you know, starting to unravel the quote traditionalness of parenting. Now I think I'm a much better parent when it comes to having those conversations about being equitable and what we're doing. Because when he went off to college, I was like, here's the thing. I get that you look light. You probably tell people you're a white kid. Like, I get it. It's your choice. It's your decision. You have a connection to the Black community. If there's a way, if you have a foot in the door and you're not doing anything to keep the door open to help your darker hued brothers and sisters come through that door, we're going to have a problem, because you have access in the way that your uncle doesn't have access. Your cousins don't have access. So like that, I'm putting that burden on you to understand, because we can't walk away. The oppression of our people is never going to end unless people who look like us step into those spaces where they don't know that we are, and we say, here's how we can make it better. Like, please listen to us, stop murdering us. Let us write stories. I'm laughing. It's not funny, but
it's not funny. I mean? But did you hear that sentence? Stop murdering us. Also, I'd love to write a story.
Yeah.
Also, fiction.
You know, because it is one of those things where it's like, and I say this all the time now, if I were to have a child now this year, and he and I've had that conversation, I was like, it would look so different, because what I know now as a parent is not what I knew then as a parent. And I was having a conversation with my mom recently. I said, I am so disappointed in how my counterparts are still upholding some of this crap, because one, they were 10 years older. We learned so much more by the time we were 30. And then two, like, this isn't 2014. Like, we are in a much more, we had so much growth in the last 10 years when it comes to understanding race and equity, and gender issues. Why are my peers still doing this sort of quote traditional type of shit and perpetuating this system continuously? Like, I struggle, because it's like, don't sit there and tell me that you're mad because your husband doesn't help and he doesn't do all these things, but then also you're kind of doing the same shit to your daughters that was done to us. Like, why did I break this cycle? Is it because I'm a single parent and that wasn't a choice I made? I knew it was going to just happen because of who I laid down with? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and I was watching, it's on HBO, and it's called Sort of, and a father dies, and all of the, what is the word I want to use here? I know that I know what all of the biological men in the family are given what I would call power inheritances. So like money, assets, stock, maybe land, maybe a company. And this man had a daughter, and the mom tries to sit down with her and explain why. And the daughter goes, you don't have to, because I know why. And it's because they're from a very conservative type of culture and a conservative religion. And she goes, I know exactly why I didn't get as much as these yahoos over here, no matter how he felt about them, no matter what I did towards his end days to take care of him, no matter what I've done for the family. And it was I never got confirmed on the show she was an eldest daughter, but it was that eldest daughter role. Like, I held it together. And when you were in a bad place as parents, I pretended that you weren't bad parents. And when they were bad siblings, I told them that they were bad siblings and things like that. And it is pressure that naturally gets put on women, where it's like, make this better so they can make money. And I think we're still so early in this idea that women are only assigned or born to be caregivers and the emotional status of your household and everything, raising men who are going to be like, hey, your wife might make more than you one day, and then you have to be the house husband. Or, hey, your wife might be down with having your children, but she might also really have a career that she cares about. What does that look like?
Or just being involved as a dad.
Also that.
Because, like, it's not just about, like, women having careers. It's also about shared responsibility in the home. You know, I can't explain to, I don't even, it got to the point where it's just like, anytime, you know, the dad wanted to spend time, it was like, okay, I got to make sure I have food ready at the house then, because they're going to spend 8 hours together and I'm going to get a kid who's hungry coming home and it's been 8 hours. Like, how, like what? And that, you know, that doesn't happen anymore. Like, the development of fatherhood for him versus development of motherhood for me is so unfair, because I had to do all of those things and be all of those things while making sure that my son didn't see me as some sort of subservient type of situation, to the point where when he came home from college and I was like, I'll do your laundry for you. And he was like, what? What? Like, what? And I was like, yeah, you're home. It's your first semester of school. That's a big deal. Like, I'll do your laundry for you. Because at 8 years old, he complained about how I did his laundry. So I marched his ass to the laundry room and showed him how to do it and said, I work full time. I raise you and I'm going to school. I love you very much, but we don't have time for you to be a critic. You can do it yourself.
And then he did.
And he did for the next 10 years. And so and there wasn't a problem with that. And it turns out he preferred to do his own laundry because then he could have it in the way that he wanted, right? It developed this level of self-sustaining support in a way. And to the point where when he went to college and he realized, oh, there are people who don't know the difference between a washer and a dryer. Like,
I just remember one of the very first boundaries that my sister threw up as her and my brother-in-law became parents, and he was tiny. We were nowhere near December, let alone Christmas. And my sister looked my brother-in-law dead in the fucking eye, and she said, if you think I'm filling my own goddamn stocking when I have a son and a husband who can think of me and buy things for me and stuff my own fucking stocking, you are wrong. We laughed because I believe I was there when she set up that boundary, and we all had a laugh at it. But then I thought, I was like, but how many women don't have that conversation with their husbands? And then kids, when they're kind of 8 to the 10 mark, go, why doesn't mom ever have anything under the tree?
it's that SNL skit, right? The SNL skit where she's like, and I got a robe. I got that. And they've got all these amazing gifts. And she's like, still got my robe. Like, that's all I got is this fucking robe that they paid 50% off for. And that's part of it too, right? Like, I'm not saying women, you're the problem. That's not what I'm saying. I understand what I'm about to say is going to sound like it. We need to be able to say, this is the expectation before we get married, before we have children. I didn't have the luxury to be like, here's the expectation because it was a whoopsie pregnancy. But in the hospital, we had a conversation about hyphenating the name. Then I don't hear from him for 2 months, 3 months, whatever it was. It's either 2 months or 3 months, depending on what kind of mood I'm in, right? But it was a long period of time. It was a long enough period of time where his mother said, oh, you know, and he didn't show up to a doctor's appointment, to the point where his mother said he really wanted to be there. And I said, well, he can tell me that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're in the hospital. My child is days old. We had a conversation months prior about hyphenating the name. I filled in the paperwork. He goes to sign it and he says, well, I thought we were going to hyphenate the name. And I said, well, that was before I didn't hear from you for 2 months. And I don't want to be stuck with a 5-year-old who has a different last name than me. And he just kind of got quiet. And like, part of me is like, was I so forceful in my boundaries that it pushed him out? But also, no, I'm not giving that grace, because here's the thing. I'm an over communicator. We had set up days and times of weeks for him to call and be involved and do all the things. And he never hit the mark once. Or he would hit the mark once, something would go wrong, and then he never did it again. And it just got to the point where it was just like, I think he realized it's probably better for me to stay away, but the way he did it was kind of shitty.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, though, he is stepping up now, and it makes me really frustrated because it's like, I hate that no one held you accountable
Yeah.
for any of it. And here I was being held accountable 24/7. And again, I got a great kid out of it. Caring, considerate. He and his half brother helped me set up for a really big event in November. We had this small business Saturday event, and the boys helped me. And we were chatting, and this girl walks into the building, and his brother's like, "Oh fuck, that girl hates me. She had people jump me, blah blah." And I was like, "Baby, what is going on in your?" It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. If I could save this child, I would. Anyway, so it gets on the conversation of like, yeah, there's all these people that think I'm an asshole around town, blah blah. And I'm like, I'm really sorry that it's happening to you. Like, this child, his half brother, big heart, sweet kid, very sensitive type. And then, I was like, I said to my son, I said, do people call you an asshole ever? And he's like, he's told me he has friends and he had just had this conversation. He is universally not the asshole in the group. Like, everyone loves him. He's so kind. And then I got thinking, and they literally took the initiative to unpack the car, take the things in, like, minimal direction. I was like, yeah, fill it up with this stuff. Like, they took the direction I gave very well, but they took the initiative to do all the things, set up the tables. Julia, is this right? Mom, is this right? Like, do you want this here? Like, completely, like, if 40-year-old men did this,
Mm-hmm.
I would have been like, I will marry you, but they're my children. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so afterwards, after they leave, and they're like, okay, call us if you need anything, hugs, kisses, they leave, right? I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, here are these boys who look like kids that you would clutch your purse closer to you because they've got a punk rock style, who are sweet, who are kind, who are considerate, who made sure my needs were being met on a day that they knew was going to be big and stressful for me. And the world is going to tell them, you're an asshole. Why are you so soft? You're being a little shit. What is wrong with you? You shouldn't be this way. Men aren't helpful. Men don't cry. Men don't feel emotion. And I'm crying at the event because I'm just like, I don't want the world to break these boys. They're so sweet and so kind and so generous and so unfearful of experiencing their emotions. And that is so rare.
Well, yeah, literally genuine, generous. I think also one of the points that I'm getting from you is you weren't afraid that accidentally, knowing everything that you would know, that you were going to raise a misogynist. Instead, you were worried about, well, I didn't raise a misogynist, and now this is how misogyny is going to tell my kid that he's wrong.
100%. 100%. Because I think, and I've had this conversation with my friend Nikki on various episodes of my show, I don't want to live in an environment where I don't feel safe. And my child knows that. And we've had those conversations when he wants to have friends over, when he wants to have parties. It's like, please make sure that you're inviting people over who aren't going to ruin the vibe of the house. And so now he's adopted that. Like, I want to feel safe in my home, in my space. And it makes me sad that there isn't a culture that allows men to feel anything that isn't just anger and rage, because it's so much more wonderful than that. And I think too, I saw the way his dad was treating me and the other women in his life. And I didn't want to be a 36-year-old grandmother. And I didn't want to not have a relationship with whomever my child was partnered with, because that's my story. I had to deal with somebody who abandoned her children, and then, the emotional damage between all of them kind of bonded them in a way that it's whatever. But I didn't want to be excluded in the way that I was excluding. And I was excluding because they weren't healthy people for us to be around.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because the situation with him and his other child and that child's mother is less than ideal. And I think because of the way that had his second relationship with a mother of a child had been on the other side of the spectrum, because it was on the side of the spectrum of volatile and not great for a long, long time, I think when he finally did a dissection of what would have been the better, like what is ideal, he realized that maybe I was being reasonable and a little bit of a better person. I also think, I will say, I really do think that we need to say it to people, it's okay if you don't want to be a dad. It's okay if you don't want to be a mom. Because I think if we had heard that 20 years ago, we would have had a completely different outcome. It's still me being the solo parent, but less emotional abandonment damage. Because I didn't want him to grow up to be his dad. I'm just going to say it.
Just say it on the hot mic. That's your business.
Yeah.
Because we're still living in a world where if women choose to step down from their family or step out on their family or do something different, then it's like a crime against a mother nature. Like, I mean, there are still people on TikTok touting that biologically we all want to be mothers and that we're just lying to ourselves and whatnot. And then for
sorry, that's so ridiculous.
Isn't that so ridiculous? Just like the chemicals that I'm ignoring in my brain.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh.
And then for men who step out on their families, it's just a tale as old as time. It's like, you could have picked better, I guess. And it's shitty on both ends. And what it doesn't take into account is just because kids' brains are developing doesn't mean that they don't notice. And so as adults, we have the language to be like, oh, I know when I was resented more than I was wanted. And so to not even believe that there is a third option, which is not to do it, and that just be okay in a grown-up conversation that we all have together. Because it also usually falls on the woman who is pregnant to be like, and if you don't want to be involved, that's fine. I can do it on my own.
I just watched the Sex and the City episode where Miranda told Steve that she was pregnant and that he can be as involved or not involved as he wants. And I'm sitting there thinking, or we just don't fucking tell him.
If you don't want him around, don't have him around.
Because this idea of, oh, I have a right to know if I have children. Okay, do you though? Because if you don't want kids, because then it creates this whole obligatory shit. Because he did ask me to marry. He's like, should we get married? No, we shouldn't get married. Because that's what the generations before us did. Oh, I'm pregnant, let's get married because we can't have babies out of wedlock. And then you have these miserable situations. Some scenarios it works out well. Like I've joked that I'm going to hire a matchmaker because, you know, sometimes you need an outside party to make that happen. But at the same time, it's like, there's no way that getting married would have been the right answer or any answer. And if for me, it was like all of those lines I drew was like, you're showing me with your behavior that you don't want to be a part of this. So I'm going to set myself up so I'm successful in this as much as I can be, right? Like you disappeared when I was pregnant. You disappeared 2 years later. You're showing me who you are. And instead of me expecting you to be someone else, I acknowledged it, I accepted it, and I did my damn thing so that way my kid knew that that was not how you do it. Without saying, you know what your dad did was shitty. Because it's none of his business. It's none of his business, my opinion about his dad. Now that he's older and we can have conversations, it's a little bit more vulnerable. But, we had a hard, fast rule. We don't talk shit about your dad in front of him. Like, no, that's not allowed because he needs to make up his own mind. I'm also not going to glamorize and protect the image just so that way we can be thrilled when you want to fucking spend time with him. I didn't play that game either. So I think, and I would actually have to talk with my child about this, but from where I sit, I feel like I did it as close to decent as possible because I didn't want him to because that's what happened with his dad and the parent that left. The pain and the hurt was protected. I don't want to say glamorized, but it definitely was glossed over that there was a problem and that, this is now a Disneyland mom, despite the turmoil it caused and the lack of response, and all the things. So then it's like the reality of the situation of the pain and the hurt and the trauma was completely swept under the rug. So then now there's this idolization that's happening. I didn't want that either. I don't want you to idolize the person that left us and decided that this wasn't it. Because it's not, it's fine. That's the choice and it's fine. But I don't need you chasing after that approval the rest of your life. I'm not going to help set up that expectation.
Well, and I think that's also part of the subculture of misogyny, where it's like even when they're doing wrong, they're doing good.
Yeah, and I didn't want that.
Yeah, so it's, on Ginny in Georgia, she's writing fake postcards from prison. So her kid thinks that he has a relationship with his father in prison. It's he meant to call. I don't even know. It's grandparents calling mothers of children to be all like, I think he really is going to show up on Sunday, though. I think it's going to be fine.
But then that centers the kid in the situation rather than saying, hey, you know what? It sucks that your dad didn't show up. It's not about you. It's about him. So it's shifting it, right? Like instead of putting the placating that we do so the child doesn't feel bad still makes it about the child feeling bad, and maybe it's the child's actions and behavior versus me saying, I don't know why your dad didn't call. That's on him. That's not about you. They're different, right? Like I'm picking up what you're putting down. I'm understanding it correctly, I think, right?
They are different. And when we glamorize or sweep or go, oh, but he was trying his hardest, or any of that stuff, and have either a too negative of a reaction or a too calm or a too positive glowing reaction to it, we start normalizing that, like, okay, well, your dad's going to do whatever he wants to do. But whatever he did was the right choice for him in the moment. So we accept that. Or whatever he did was the wrong choice and we hate him for it. So then that also creates sons who become fathers who are like, well, whatever I'm going to do, it's all about whatever I'm going to do anyways. And there will be someone to either sing my praises, or I'm the guy who can't do anything right, so I'm a do me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for me, it was like, it sucks that your dad didn't call. I'm very, very sorry. I don't know what his deal is. You can have that conversation with him. Let's go out and get ice cream. Like, I don't know if that was the right answer, at the time, but it definitely turned into a situation where my child was able to sort of like do a compare and contrast and understand. And then when there was another child involved in the situation, really highlighting the differences in fatherhood. And, that was a thing for a while. But I think for me, the root of it was at the very end of the day, my motivation was, I do not want to have a child who doesn't know how to have a conversation and leaves me with a shit ton of grandchildren I don't know. And not even leaves me with them. Like, I'm not even with them. I just don't know them because he's had these fractured relationships and they don't want to have anything to do with our side of the family. Like, that is like the thing I'm working against.
Well, yeah. And I think what you did was you set down the foundation of like, hey, we don't have to actually wait around to be sad or disappointed for this. Like, we can nip this right now and go get ice cream. Like, today's disappointment doesn't have to define what today is all about.
Yeah. And the thing of it too, like, we had access to the paternal side, so that also made it easier. So there wasn't that piece of like, well, I don't know my dad's side, so I want to go figure it out kind of situation. When a time when emotions were high, the other grandparents were actively involved, which then aided in the, I don't understand why you are like this, because your parents your dad and stepmom are fucking amazing.
Wouldn't that be something if you had learned?
Right? Which also aided in the whole, because then I was like, oh no, I understand why you're like this, because there was that idolization of like, yay, mom's in town, we're going to be Disneyland. And without any acknowledgement of like any of it, right? And
the rock star parent, the vacation parent, like, oh, yes, dad's making a tour. Stop.
Yeah.
So we are wrapping up on the hour. So let's go ahead. And if you had to boil down, I don't know, maybe instead of one lesson, it's the top 3 parenting tips and tricks or whatever. But if you had to look at a mom who was as hyper-focused on feminism as I am every day, to the point where I cry a lot. And she has just been told that she's having a son. And she's like, how did I do this? Because the world. What do you tell her?
I say it's an opportunity that's like the universe giving you something to help break down misogyny and the patriarchy. in the way that you raise that little boy. And those, the examples are allow him to feel his emotions, have open conversation with him. If there is a behavior that you don't like, that you've observed that he's starting to demonstrate, talk about it, or, get it while it's hot, like the example with my mom and the way that my son said something to my mom. It's like, you don't get to talk to grandma that way. She's done nothing but be lovely to you. Like, did she do something that hurt your feelings? And if the answer is yes, then we unpack it, right? Like, what was it that hurt your feelings? I think the biggest thing when it comes to raising boys is accepting and acknowledging that they will experience a full range of emotions and walking with them through it versus telling them how to feel.
I don't have a lesson because I'm not raising children.
No, you're child free by choice, which is also a thing that should be praised. Because if you understand and recognize it, okay, I know we're wrapping up. My sister made the decision to be child free. And I was talking to somebody, an old boss about this one day. And she said, oh, that's so selfish about my sister choosing to be child free.
The fuck?
And I said, selfish? I think it shows that she recognizes and understands her capacity of what she can give in this world. And like crickets.
So I'm just going to be a really great chaotic aunt who reminds my nephew at all times that women and the queer community and people of color are the coolest, no matter what Indiana looks like.
And I think a lot of ways that you're doing that is you're sharing the pieces about you that aren't the status quo. And that's another huge part of it too, right? Like, it's that experience and exposure of normalizing something different can exist and it can be okay.
Yeah. I'm going to be a great chaotic aunt. Good for me.
Yeah.
As always, great for me. What's your manifestation?
It's so hard because, like I told you, I've got friends who are raising little kids, and I'm like, I don't understand how we had very sincere conversations about ways that we can improve and make the society better for all. And then you're raising your children in a system that is damaging to everybody. I don't get it. Like, why are you upholding it?
I do get it. And it's because the abusive system, as always, keeps us tired, broken down, and overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And I hate to be this person, and you can give me shit for it. I will accept it. I was very much a tired, broken down single parent.
Yes. I mean, it can and should be done. But it's one of those things where I couldn't defend women at the Grammys one more time without telling you I'm going to burst into tears if someone brings up the Grammys one more time.
Well, and I think we're on kind of the same page, because for me, it's like we have to muscle through the exhaustion because that's how we break it. That's how we win. That's how we dismantle it a tiny bit at a time, because it is the exhaustion. That's what they want. That's the design. That's the intention. And if we can stand up against that and be like, you know what, I know I'm tired today and my kids are irritating the shit out of me, but let's do some, emotional investment in my children. That's a win. So I guess my manifestation would be, does this count? I'm sending a little extra oomph to all the women out there raising children who are exhausted and don't have the energy. I'm giving them a little bit more.
A little caffeine boost. A little espresso.
Yes. Here's your little tiny bit so you can make that emotional investment in your kids because I know you want to. It's that defeatism. I want the feeling of defeat to be diminished in you, because that's how we lose, is when we feel defeated.
Yeah.
Is that a manifestation? I don't even know if I do it right.
Yeah.
Every time I'm on the show, I'm like, I don't know if I did the manifestation right, Natalie.
Did you wish for something? I believe that you just wished for us to all stop being so tired, which is lovely.
Yes.
As always, I'm going to take this as an opportunity. I would like to manifest for myself as the chaotic aunt that is finding it increasingly harder to set aside the woman that I feel like I need to be breaking the barriers, to be moving the envelope, to be the example of how we make this shithole better. I would like to manifest for myself that there are moments within my nephew's existence to where I'm not constantly writing myself lesson plans for like, but this is how we make you a good guy.
Right.
This is how we make you one who's not going to drive me crazy when you're 22. This is how we make sure I don't have to fight you in the yard. Like, because I've had to fight in the yard. I have.
I know,
And
you told me.
And I would like to be so not focused on that and instead just focus on making him interesting, because I'm also very worried that children who are growing up now have boring childhoods and therefore have no hobbies.
Yeah.
Except for smearing creams on their face on TikTok.
But I think you nailed it. It's just your sheer existence in their world and giving them something that is more than just, well, that's a cute kid in the corner.
Just taking him to Broadway and be like, do you see that leaping man over there? His existence matters.
You know what? I didn't tell you the story. I know we're wrapping up, but when my son was interested in dance, he specifically wanted to do ballet. I called every fucking ballet studio in town and said, I'd like to sign my son up for ballet lessons. And every single one, with the exception of one, the one who is renowned in our community, who is the theater school for our local professional ballet company, was the only one. And I should have called them first, but I called every other one first. And they were like, boys don't want to do ballet. Don't you want to put them in hip hop? And I said, no. And I actually think that that's a really bad attitude. Click. Because if that's the way you're going to see it, I don't want you training my son in ballet then. You're not going to be a good teacher. And then, you know what? We did a summer class. Turns out he was like, it's too slow for me. And I said, it's slow now, but it won't be if you stick with it. And he's like, no, I'm okay. I got to experience it. I'm good. It's like, cool. Saves me so much money.
I too flunked out of being a ballerina.
But it's just that attitude of like, well, boys don't want to do ballet. Ma'am, do you not? Like, you shouldn't be a dance studio because you clearly don't know that there are a lot of companies out there with men.
Right. I refuse to let my nephew do some sports because of concussions.
I support that.
And rage issues within the community. So when they talk about him having hobbies that are sports, I'm like, you mean like figure skating? Because I love fucking figure skating. Yeah. As like some ribbon dancing and some like floor gymnastics. And my sister's like, hell yeah. I'm like, yeah, gymnastics. Get on the rings. Get that core. Yeah, ballet. Mm-hmm. Mostly just anything that isn't shooting people on Fortnite. Because I have to connect with you as a person too. And what if I'm bored? I have too much ADHD for that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So Julia, go ahead and plug. Thank you so much for being here once again. I think that this is important because there are mothers who are raising sons. And I can't just focus on daughters if I feel like the world has to change.
Yeah, and I am shocked. 20 years later, I'm shocked that we haven't made any needle movements. You can find me and support my work. I'm on Instagram, the Julia Washington. TikTok is the same handle. I paint cards. I pour candles. I have a show, Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous, where we analyze pop culture through the lens of race or gender and sometimes both. I have a show, Jolly Pop's Book Club, where we read book to screen adaptations. It is also a book club that you can join, and we meet once a month. The cards and the candles, hand poured candles. I almost said hand poured cards.
What if they were though?
They could be hand painted hand painted candles. You got to leave this all in. Hand painted cards, hand poured candles. Lots of literary themed stuff. Lots of puns. But it's a little tiny piece of art that is accessible because art sometimes isn't accessible, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And you can find all of those at juliawashingtonproductions.com.
All right. And everybody, you should be following us at Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram. You should definitely be on the Patreon because there is free shit there. Mm-hmm. And this episode is so far into the future, I'm not going to make any promises on what the free shit is. Yeah. Because I only have 3 months planned out for the free shit, and I believe that this episode is in the 4th or 5th month. That is still a question mark in my head, which is fine, but it's free shit. And most importantly, if you really love the free shit, you'll really like the paid for shit, like our new segment show. It's a little bit late night, it's a little bit Chelsea Handler, it's a whole lot of me.
Yes.
The Misogyny Meltdown, where I am not just screaming about misogyny. I'm making jokes at its expense.
Love that.
And I'm writing skits and I'm writing comedy. And there's a video component, which we've never done on Men I've Tolerated.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited. It's such a great show. Everyone should tune in. You need to join the highest tier so you have access to that because it is fantastic.
Because if you join the highest tier, then I'll actually take professional classes on how to be video editing the stuff that I'm making for you. Wouldn't that be something?
I love it.
So remember out there, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including watching a whole lot of people perpetuate cycles that we are tired and exhausted from when you worked so hard to break that cycle in your own home. Smiles are for joy.